school committee under the November 6th meeting link. For those joining us in person, you can access the meeting documents by scanning the QR code that's posted by the doors. The meeting documents have been translated into all of the major BPS languages. Any translations that are not ready prior to the start of the meeting will be posted as soon as they are finalized. The meeting will be rebroadcast on Boston City TV and posted on the school committee's webpage and on YouTube. The committee is pleased to offer live, simultaneous interpretation virtually in Spanish, Haitian Creole, Caboveriano, Cantonese, Mandarin, Vietnamese, and American Sign Language. The Zoom interpretation feature has been activated. Zoom participants should click the globe icon at the bottom of your screen to select your language preference. I'd like to remind everyone to speak at a slower pace to assist our interpreters. Before we begin the meeting, I'd like to briefly pause and reflect. The outcomes from yesterday's election gives us a lot to think about. We don't know yet all of the implications of question 2's passing. We will collaborate closely with the state to understand next steps. Our students graduating prepared for whatever path they choose after graduation remains a top priority. We will continue to concentrate our efforts on equitable access to rigorous and culturally affirming educational experiences. We serve a rich and wonderful diversity of students and families in our district. Our students enter our schools with varying needs, backgrounds, and experiences, and we welcome them all. The rich diversity extends also to our staff. It is our diversity and differences that make Boston Public Schools so special. This has not changed. We are committed, as we always have been, to making decisions in our students' best interests. Our focus remains on ensuring that all of our students feel safe and supported. Each of us is holding the results of the election differently. Please take care of yourself and your loved ones. I'd now like to open the floor to other members if anyone would like to share any additional comments. Anyone? No? Okay.
I'll say, just in general, I think it's better that we don't say anything. I'm just saying, I'm speaking for myself. I think it's better that I don't say anything, just because some real stuff might come out.
Okay, I hear you.
That's all I'll say.
I hear you. I hear you. Thank you. Okay, thanks. We will begin the meeting with the approval of minutes. I will now entertain a motion to approve the minutes of the October 23rd, 2024 school committee meeting and October 28th, 2024 school committee retreat. Is there a motion? So moved. Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you. Is there any discussion or objection to the motion? Is there any objection to approving the motion by unanimous consent? Hearing none, the minutes are approved. We'll now move on to the superintendent's report. I present to you our superintendent, Mary Skipper.
Thank you, Chair Robinson, and good evening to everyone in the audience, both in person and virtual. Yesterday was a historic day in our nation as we awaited the results of one of the most consequential elections of our lifetime. We acknowledge that many students, families, educators, and staff may have strong feelings regarding the results of yesterday's election. It is critical that our schools and district offices remain safe and respectful spaces for students and adults, particularly in unsettled times. We ask for every member of our BPS community's cooperation and understanding to ensure that our schools and district offices are places where respect for one another is shown. I also want to recognize that the weeks and days leading up to the election have been a time of heightened stress and anxiety for many members of our community. BPS schools will continue to be safe and supportive places for all students, families, and staff. The district will have resources in place for any students or staff who may need support, including social and emotional support staff who can assist students and schools as needed. Our mission will remain the same: to ensure that every student in every school has access to high quality, equitable education, inclusive of race, nationality, gender, religion, disability, sexual orientation, or other identity or background. I'm really happy to report that voting itself went smoothly at all 26 BPS schools that also served as polling sites around the city. I want to thank our school leaders, teachers, school-based staff, and custodians who worked diligently to ensure that schools were ready and had the support and additional resources they needed to ensure that students' learning was not disrupted. I'm especially proud of the 90 students from 16 BPS high schools who spent the day as poll workers. Now in its 5th year, the Student Poll Worker Program is a collaboration between the BPS History and Social Science Department and the City of Boston Elections Department. Students must be 16 by election day to participate. They serve as greeters, inspectors, and interpreters. This year, students supported voters with interpretation in 15 different languages, including Haitian Creole, Spanish, Vietnamese, Somali, and Chinese. Students worked the polls from 6 a.m. until 2 p.m., and they were paid for attending training and for their election day service. The BPS Humanities team visited students at their sites and heard comments like, "I'm really excited now to vote when I'm able." One of the students from English High School had a chance to talk to our own representative, Ayanna Presley, at their polling location at the Chittick Elementary. I want to thank participating students for their valuable contribution to our city and to our democracy. I also want to thank our city partners for providing our students with this unique learning and civic engagement opportunity. And congratulations to our BPS students who voted for the first time. As you continue into your adulthood, I hope you'll continue to make your voice heard. Stay engaged, get involved, and exercise your right to vote in every election. As you know, by this point, ballot question 2 passed last night, eliminating the MCAS test as a graduation requirement for the state for our high school students. Like cities and towns across the Commonwealth, we're reviewing the impact of the vote. Today, we received some initial guidance from DESE concerning students who need to retake the MCAS. We expect more information about how districts should adjust to this change going forward, and we'll keep the committee and the public up to date as information and guidance becomes available. Tonight's agenda presentation, which is an update on the district's adoption of Mass Core graduation requirements, is especially timely given last night's MCAS vote. I want to reassure you and the public that all BPS high schools are aligned to the Mass Core, and we continue to make great progress with the implementation of Mass Core, especially the academic core, math, ELA, science, and social studies. A little later, we'll hear more on the district's work and some of the outstanding issues that we continue to address and are committed to solve. Last Monday night, I joined members of This is Halloween. Last Monday night, I joined members of my executive team and school committee members at a retreat here at the bowling building. It was a productive evening that gave us time to engage together in team building exercises and reflect on our mutual goals and expectations. I had the opportunity to review some of my priorities for the district and engage in thoughtful discussions with the members about our shared goals. I look forward to continuing that conversation at our next scheduled meeting, which is November 20th. I'm pleased to share that last week, DASE, or the Massachusetts Department of Elementary and Secondary Education, announced its approval of 7 of our proposals for expanded multilingual education for the 25-26 school year. Making the district's largest expansion of programming designed to serve multilingual learners in 40 years. Approval of the new programs is validation that we're moving in the right direction in our efforts to serve our multilingual learners. The new programs reflect our commitment to centering students' identities and leveraging their home language to accelerate their learning in school. The approvals follow a community engagement process that took place during school year 23-24. After receiving specific feedback, the team in the Office of Multilingual and Multicultural Education, or what we call OME, developed proposals for schools around the city that will serve English language learners and newcomers to the district, kindergarten to high school. OME and our partners in the schools are excited to get to work implementing the new programs. We'll provide each school with the support and the resources they need to sustain and grow these programs. During the first year, more than 200 students will have access to the programs, which are expected to expand capacity by 30% in each subsequent year. BPS submitted a total of 9 applications, and we continue to work with DASE on the approval of the remaining 2. Quick update on BPS transportation. Last week, we hit a new benchmark in the morning on-time performance. It was 95% last Friday. That was the first time this year, and it was almost an entire month earlier than what we had seen in the previous year. Morning on-time performance has averaged 92% this week, which is 6% higher than the same week last year. And the afternoon on-time performance averaged 84% last year compared to 85% during the same week. So we're starting to see that gap rapidly close now in the afternoon, or what we call the PM OTP. We're going to continue to work on the progress of this, reporting it out, but we just want to make sure that we share the good news that we are ahead of where we were last year in a number of different ways. And we'll continue to do that. So just a big shout out to the Transportation Department for that hard work. Massachusetts Port Authority representatives visited Dorchester's Albert Holland School of Technology STEM aviation program last week and urged students to keep flying high during a special ceremony highlighting scholarship and career opportunities. Holland Tech Senior and STEM aviation program standout Fahad Yassin received a special surprise. He got a flight simulator of his own that he can use to practice in pursuit of his dream to becoming a commercial airline pilot. He also received a proclamation from District 4 Boston City Councilor Brian Worrell. You may remember last spring that Fahad became the first student in the Holland STEM aviation program to fly an airplane, which was a Cessna 172 at the Norwood Memorial Airport. So congratulations to Holland Tech and certainly to Fahad for just an incredible achievement. Students from the Blackstone School also got a special visit last week from Tessie, thanks to the Red Sox Foundation and Playworks New England. Students had fun playing baseball and getting Tessie's autograph. Tessie's always like a big hit at these events. Yesterday, the Blackstone hosted a visit from the New England Patriots Foundation. Patriots quarterback Joe Milton and former player Max Lane read to students who were also given books during the school's Scholastic Book Fair. We have some exciting news from BPS Athletics. First, nearly 300 student athletes competed in the Boston Athletic Association's annual middle school cross-country championships last month at Franklin Park. Elliott Innovation School student Marin Goff won the girls race, and Boston Latin School student Nathan Bisio won the boys race. The O'Brien School of Math and Science prevailed in the co-ed relay over the McKay K-8. Thank you to our partners at the BAA for another great event for so many of our students. East Boston High School senior Christopher Acosta was named as the MIAA Student of the Month in September. A standout soccer player and student, Christopher is known for encouraging his teammates and fostering a positive environment on and off the field. He also volunteers as a translator at school events and as a team leader during the school's annual holiday toy drive. Christopher is one of 20 student athletes, 10 boys and 10 girls, who will be honored with this recognition during this school year. Congratulations to Christopher on this outstanding achievement, and thank you to his coach, Jason Smith, for nominating him. The fall regular season concluded with our annual City Championships event. Congratulations to the following 2024 Fall City Champions: volleyball, BLA, girls soccer, BLA, and boys soccer, Boston International Newcomers Academy, or BINCA. We just want to say congratulations to all of the teams, to the athletes that participated in the MIA postseason tournaments, and we'll keep you up to date as the teams continue to advance. Lieutenant Governor Kim Driscoll, Massachusetts Secretary of Education Pat Tutwiler, and representatives of the Museum of Science visited East Boston's Bradley Elementary School during Mass STEM Week last month, where students worked in small groups to engineer plastic filters using everyday materials. Mass STEM Week takes place every October to foster a lifelong interest in science, technology, engineering, and math. Russell and Kenny Elementary School students celebrated the fall season recently with events at their schools. Superheroes, witches, skeletons collected goodies in their creative costumes at the Kenny School Trunk or Treat. Russell School students celebrated the fall season by voting on the best decorated pumpkin, enjoyed apple cider and cider donuts, and participated in a dance party. So thank you to both school communities for creating fun, student, and family-centered events. This is really our goal, to show you all of the wonderful things that are happening every day out in our schools in BPS. On Tuesday, November 12th, I'll be participating in a youth-led town hall discussion with Mayor Wu and Boston High School students here at the Bowling Building from 4:30 to 6. The event's being held in collaboration with youth organizations across Boston, the Mayor's Youth Council, and the Boston Student Advisory Council, or BSAC. Students are invited to speak and share their lived experiences in BPS schools. Adults who would like to support are encouraged to tune in via the live stream link that will be available on the city's website at boston.gov. And if you're a BPS student and you'd like more information about sharing your experience and coming to the town hall, please reach out directly to Denise Rory, who's the director of the Office of Youth Leadership. And she can be reached at DRORIE, to Rory, at bostonpublicschools.org. Before I close, I'd like to remind everyone that the BPS Office of Family and Community Advancement is hosting its second annual open house tomorrow, Thursday, November 7th. It'll be here on the first and second floors of the Bowling Building from 5 to 7 p.m. I hope you're able to stop by. It's always a great time. BPS representatives and community partners will be available to share valuable resources for students and families, as well as hands-on activities, food, refreshments, music, raffle prizes. It's really a great time. There'll be something for every age group, including information on internship opportunities for our high school students. Interpretation services will be available, as well as transportation from the following locations: Codman Square Library in Dorchester, Maverick MBTA Station in East Boston, and the Mattapan Library in Mattapan. It's really going to be a fun evening, as it always is, so please join us. Many bright spots and information. That concludes my report, Chair, and happy to take questions.
Thank you, Superintendent. And I'll now like to open it up to questions and discussion from the committee. I'd like to remind my colleagues about our agreed upon norm that we each have 5 minutes. That's 1 to 2 questions. Please make sure your questions are on topics related to the items in the superintendent's report. Other topics not related to the superintendent's report can be raised during new business later in the evening. I would also like to remind BPS staff to be brief in your responses, and please speak at a slower pace to assist our interpreters. Thank you. Sure. Okay, we'll start here and go there.
Thank you for the report, Superintendent Skipper. I just don't have any questions. I just wanted to give a shout out to for this, that's 7 programs being approved. I think in terms of questions is what that implementation is going to look like, staffing, how we're communicating to families, that they're available. I know the school leaders and folks, are already aware, but just interested to learn more about that when that information becomes available. But just wanted to give them, a shout out for that. And of course, shout out to the Transportation Department from the report that you provided. And that is all. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Dr. Hawkins?
Just obviously it's still fresh, but do you have any scheduled meetings, meeting either with BSAC or with student groups in the coming days, just to understand some of their concerns and sort of their needs for support services, things like that?
Right. So right now we are working in the schools themselves. Many of the schools gave space today for students to be able to have some conversation. And we think that that will be more so in the days to come. BSAC is always a group that, I know Chief McCarthy meets with regularly to just to be able to get a pulse. Additionally, I think for the high schools, we're encouraging the principals to be able to give space for the students as either concerns arise or suggestions arise of ways that they can continue to give voice. So I think more of that will come. The schools were very kind of quiet today. I think everybody was in space of kind of shock and maybe thinking how to process everything. And so I think it was just important for us to be able to let the students know and the staff know, as we did last week, that we'd be creating that space for them.
Thank you. Anyone else? Mr. O'Neill?
Superintendent, 2 things. First of all, thank you for starting off your comments talking about how important it is for our students to feel safe and secure in our classrooms, particularly as we all process. And appreciate the understanding that there were going to be various stages as well for our students and our staff. So I'm glad to hear that you've been intentional about that. And thank you, Chair, for saying that up front as well, that our schools are welcoming and safe for all of our students. Superintendent, on transportation, I'm delighted to hear we hit 95 last Friday, and also what the average has been going to and how it is ahead of last year. I'm curious, are there any obstacles now that you see to continue, for continued improvement and what's being done about them? I'll just leave the question at that. What are the main things you're still working on there?
I don't know if Dan, you would like to add to this, but I'll say from my perspective, I think some of this is around consolidation of routes and, or really looking at routes that continue to be problematic in terms of driving the OTP down, particularly in the afternoon. So I know that the routing team is working on that. I think it continues to be us making sure that that drivers, and particularly new drivers, are onboarded so that they have a knowledge of how to be able to use the application. We continue to also work with families around that. And there's, I think, definitely some adaptive work that we're working toward in terms of ridership relative to like when we know students are not riding the bus, being able to make sure that drivers are not waiting at those stops. So that's part of the work that Dan and his team are doing to sort of shorten routes or rearrange routes in an attempt to, again, get as close or as improved to the 95% as we're able to. Dan?
Yeah, I think that's right, Superintendent. I think we now have 2 months of initial ridership data, and we really need to, one, validate that data and make sure that we're really confident that it is correct and accurate, and then think about how are we using that to improve the efficiency of routes. So I think that's our big focus right now. And then I think longer term, with the understanding that transportation is one piece of the greater BPS ecosystem, there are still some underlying structural challenges around school assignments and students with disabilities and those aspects of how do we make sure that we have a system that's built for success for all of our students.
Thank you for that. And thank you, because I know you're doing so many little small pieces that ultimately are ending up to catapult us, well above prior averages. So I just want to make sure, folks understand that. And I'm also trying to understand, this is not the first time I've asked this question, and it's obviously been in the press as well, about our student athletes. And I know it's challenging because of late afternoon, right, pickups, and not just for our schools, but for charter schools, parochial schools, et cetera. How much of is that an impact on trying to arrange, not just for our student athletes, which is critical, but also field trips we have going on? Could you just talk about, and I assume you're cautiously optimistic that this is an area we're going to be able to show improvement on. But if you could just talk for a little bit about some of the challenges on that and how we feel we're going to be able to improve.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm not sure. I should have directed that to you, Superintendent. Sorry. I apologize.
Sorry. Yeah, so this is obviously critical. It's not just how do we get students to and from school, but how do we make sure that they have access to athletics, to field trips, to to games, all those additional pieces as well, where transportation is a critical piece. I think that we're we have not been there and we're not there this year. We, so far this year, about 4% of scheduled athletics trips have not had a bus available, which is very much in line with the last few years, but we know we need to improve there. So, we've been working really closely with the athletics department on, just how do we continue to think about how and when we're scheduling these trips. When is it appropriate for a team to maybe take the MBTA because it's a sport where they have, relatively little equipment and the game is, it's just 30-minute trip on the MBTA. Maybe it's the same amount of time as it would be on a yellow bus. Give them that certainty up front and, make sure that we're scheduling within our parameters as we work to, do some of this other work with ridership and consolidation of runs that will allow us to use some of that excess capacity to, provide more buses for athletics and field trips and these types of additional transportation. And then the short-term thing that we're also really focused on is how do we improve communication around these trips? One of the challenges particularly is when a trip does not have a driver assigned in advance and it has to go into what we call the daily standby bid, where standby drivers are selecting their work for the afternoon. Teams don't find out whether they got a bus through that standby bid until about 1:30 p.m. when it's over. And at that point it's too late, to find out that you don't have a bus for the afternoon. And so one of the things that we're doing right now is getting all of that, that work into Zoom as well, the new system that we installed this year, which, we initially rolled out for home to school transportation. And, our goal is by the end of the fall to have all athletics and field trips in there as well, which will give schools and, schools more proactive communication around those trips to see where the bus is there a driver assigned, is the bus on the road? So that should help as well.
Thank you very much. I know this issue wasn't being ignored or forgotten. So, and I know it's a mosaic of a whole bunch of factors that have caused it and a whole bunch of factors that have to be peeled apart to improve it. So thank you for your attention to that.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Okay. There's nothing else then. I just want to thank you all, and I will now entertain a motion to receive the superintendent's report. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Is there any discussion or objection to the motion? Is there any objection to approving the motion by unanimous consent? Hearing none, the superintendent's report is approved. Before we move on to public comment, we're going to take a brief recess so that some IT work can be done to get us prepared. So we'll be back in a moment.
There, yeah.
He's right there. He's sitting there.
Now it's good.
We're ready.
It's working, both are working.
Okay, so we can proceed.
Yeah, but now we lost members. Okay, we're good to go.
Okay.
Oh, you know what, I'm going to move this over here because I'm.
That mic over to you, so Mayor. should have that.
Oh, that's okay.
Okay.
All right. Yeah, are we ready?
Testing,
One, two.
testing.
Okay, we're going to restart the meeting. Ms. Park?
Thank you, Chair. The public comment period is an opportunity for parents, caregivers, students, and other concerned parties to make brief presentations to the school committee on pertinent school issues. Questions on specific school matters are not answered at this time, but are referred to the superintendent for a later response. Questions on specific policy matters are not answered at this time, but may be the subject of later discussion by the committee. The meeting will feature 2 public comment periods, with the first comment period limited to 1 hour. Priority will be given to those testifying in person. Time permitting, the committee will then open it up for virtual testimony. After 1 hour, anyone who hasn't testified will have the opportunity to do so at the end of the meeting. We have 9 speakers this evening. Each person will have 3 minutes to speak, and I would remind you when you have 30 seconds remaining. If your remarks are longer than 3 minutes, please email your comments for distribution to the committee. The time that an interpreter uses for English interpretation will not be deducted from a speaker's allotted time. Speakers may not reassign their time to others. Please direct your comments to the chair and refrain from addressing individual school committee members or district staff. Please note, the comments of any public speaker do not represent the Boston Public Schools or the Boston School Committee. Please state your name, affiliation, and what neighborhood you are from before you begin. We will start this evening with our in-person speakers. Rachel Castillo, Michael McGuire, Jane Icord, Maya Jones, and Deidre Manning. Rachel Castillo, and we need our Spanish interpreter.
Buenas tardes, me llamo Rachel, yo vivo en Rosendale
Good evening. My name is Rochelle and I live in Rossendale.
y soy estudiante de Boston Public School de la English High School.
And I am a student of Boston Public Schools English High School.
Estoy aquí hoy porque represento a Sociedad Latina como líder juvenil del programa de organización comunitaria.
And I'm here because I represent Sociedad Latina as a youth leader of the program of school organizations, community organizations.
Que es una organización de desarrollo juvenil fuera de horario escolar situada en Roseberry.
And it's an after-school organization that works in Roxbury.
Mis colegas es Victoria García, Stephanie Acuayo, Julia Morales y Alessandra Oliver Dable.
My colleagues are Victoria Garcia, Stephanie Aguayo, Julia Morales, and Alexandra Oliver Dávila.
Ha hablado en estas reuniones anteriores comités escolares este otoño sobre las preocupaciones que Sociedad Latina tiene con respecto a la crisis de salud mental de los adolescentes.
And she has spoken at this meeting in the past regarding the concerns that she has regarding youth mental health.
En particular en relación con el uso de teléfono y la política de teléfonos móviles en las escuelas.
In particular, particularly speaking about the use of cell phones and the policies of cell phone use in schools.
Para integrar los teléfonos en la educación sin quitárselo ni restringírselo tanto a los estudiantes, las escuelas pueden implementar métodos de enseñanza que transformen los dispositivos de herramienta de aprendizaje.
So, for them to integrate the phones to the education and avoiding having to take them away, and at the same time to integrate these as a tool for learning.
La Asociación Nacional de Educación, por su sigla en inglés, sugiere implementar actividades como el uso de aplicaciones educativas y redes de comunicación que permitan a los estudiantes colaborar en el tiempo real.
So the National Association of Educators, NIA, has indicated that the integration of cell phones is beneficial and it should be used as a tool for integrating education in the school environment.
Convertido el teléfono en un recurso de investigación en lugar de, de una distracción, además de crear pautas claras sobre cuándo y cuándo usarla. Ayudar a los estudiantes a concentrarse y respetar los límites establecidos en clase.
And that we should that the use of cell phones should be integrated into education and should be used as a tool for them to use them as integral part of their education process.
Hemos visto ejemplos de acoso en la escuela, incluso con la política de teléfonos móviles. Los comentarios hirientes sobre su forma de expresarse y las burlas sobre su identidad le causaron una grave malestar emocional.
So we have even seen examples of cyberbullying, even though they have been the restriction of the use of cell phones in schools, especially in the way that they express, and also how they have used this, and they have caused a lot of emotional distress.
A pesar de su esfuerzo por encajar, las críticas a continuación y se intensificaron hasta el punto de cuestionar su identidad sexual y su salud mental.
Even though that they have tried to limit this, we have seen that they have been a lot of occasions where even the sexual orientation and also people criticizing through these systems.
El abuso constante le hizo planearse el suicidio como forma de escapar del dolor. Este tipo de acoso, especialmente cuando se basa en la diferencia de cultura o de expresión, puede distribuir autoestima y generar graves trastornos emocionales.
And the constant abuse made them think about suicide as a way of escaping this type of bullying, even though especially when they are based on cultural differences and expression, this could destroy the self-esteem and generate a lot of emotional distress.
Es
30
crucial.
segundos. Te queda 30 segundos.
Ok. Es crucial promover el respeto y la empatía de las redes sociales para prevenir que más personas sufran consecuencias tan graves. El causa no debe ser ignorado ya que tienes.
It's crucial to promote respect and empathy in the social media to prevent that more people have so grave consequences and avoid cyberbullying. This should not be ignored.
Thank you.
Gracias. Thank you. Next speaker is Michael McGuire.
I shall serve as my own translator after my remarks. Bona vespera, praeses et membra commissione scholae. Sum Michael Maguire, habito in West Roxbury et docio lingua latina multos annos apud Academia Latina Bostoniensis. Cum docere coepi, sciebam me nunquam divitum futurum esse, sed votam perpetuatis non feci. Nunquam putavi meam vim ememptionis tam multam et tam celeriter diminuit videre. Non possum quidem comprehendere quam mali nostri para professionalis remunerantur, mirabile opus faciunt, et morenter stipendium quod sufficit ad locandum in hac urbe. Loquamur de substitutis, utatisne loca vacua manere quia nimis bene remunerentur. Denique, tractamus profundum triumviratum nostri inclusionis concilii. Tres certificationes in una magistro nostram operam opprimunt et discipulos nostros subministrant. Good evening, Chairwoman and members of the school committee. I am Michael Maguire. I'm from West Roxbury, and I've taught the Latin language for many years at Boston Latin Academy. When I started teaching, I knew I'd never be rich, but I did not take a vow of poverty. I never thought I'd see my spending power decline so much and so rapidly. I can't begin to comprehend how poorly our paraprofessionals are paid. They do incredible work, and they deserve a wage high enough to live in our city. Shall we discuss substitutes? I started as one. Do you think the positions are unfilled because they're paid too well? And finally, let's discuss the unholy trinity of our inclusion plan. 3 certifications in 1 teacher overwhelms our staff and underserves our students. Gratias vobis ago. I thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. Next speaker is Jane Icord.
Good evening. My name is Jane Icord. I live in Jamaica Plain. I am a school librarian, and I proudly serve the community at the Lilla G. Frederick Pilot Middle School in Dorchester. One of the perks of the job is that I also get to serve students at the Carter School as we share space. I'm here to speak in support of the BTU's contract demand for fully funded, fully staffed libraries for all Boston Public School students. We can learn so much about others and about ourselves by reading books. Dr. Rudine Sims Bishop describes it like this: literature transforms human experience and reflects it back to us. And in that reflection, we can see our lives and experiences as the part of the larger human experience. You are likely familiar with Dr. Sims Bishop's metaphor of books as windows, mirrors, and sliding glass doors. The books in our libraries must represent a whole spectrum of people and lives if we are going to serve our students equitably. The district's recent investment in libraries has gotten us off to a really good start. But if we agree to the common aspiration of having the kinds of collections that fully reflect the diversity of human experience, then we must agree to an ongoing investment in books and in the library professionals who collect them. The publishing industry is getting progressively better at elevating voices that had previously gone unheard. Would we not be playing a role, albeit unintentionally, in suppressing these important voices if we fail to bring them before our students? Let us get these important books in front of our students without delay, implementing purchasing processes for books akin to that of the Boston Public Library, which does not require a competitive bid for each title purchased. Let us surpass the national average of school library collection budget of $12 per pupil. Let us establish that curating and collecting libraries that reflect our students is valuable work, though just one of the many ways librarians serve the students of Boston. I urge you to meet the BTU's demands to commit to a librarian in every school and to empower my colleagues and I to meet the challenge of getting the right books into the right hands at the right time. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker is Maya Jones.
Good evening. I apologize for my attire. I'm still trying to deal with everything from yesterday, and my t-shirt reflects that, hopefully. Thank you to the Boston School Committee for the opportunity to speak this evening. I wanted to start out by saying how much I care about our Boston Public Schools community and the vital role that education occupies in their lives. This is my 8th year serving students in the district, and it was revealed to me quite early that this is part of my life's calling. Apologize if my voice is shaky. I'm a little nervous. I've never done this before. I particularly love my school. During my time, I've spearheaded classroom and school-wide engagement initiatives, fortified relationships with families, the community, and coworkers. I've had the honor and the privilege to witness the ingenuity, brilliance, and raw ability of my students. As echoed by our superintendent Skipper, the students of BPS deserve access to a rigorous, equitable education in an environment that's safe and welcoming. Recently, last month, I experienced a traumatic assault by the hands of a student. This was precipitated by threats of physical harm. This incident was extremely difficult, not only for its profound impact on me, but it underscores a need for the district to place a heightened priority of the safety of both students and staff. I love my school, our community, and the rich offerings brought to our students by our students every day. I am calling on the Boston School Committee's support in making school safety a priority. Thank you for listening, and I appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next, our last in-person speaker is Deidre Manning.
Good evening, members of the school committee and superintendent. My name is Deirdre Manning. I am a Dorchester resident, single parent, and sole supporter of 2 public school children. I'm here again to testify about an exclusionary exam school policy that has been targeting children from certain areas of the city for exclusion for now, I think, 4 years. I'm really just trying to put in context what happened yesterday and feeling hopeless, depressed, demoralized. But I honestly can't process what happened without sort of putting into context my experience before all of you, testifying about what I think is a completely outrageous situation where my own children are targeted for exclusion from educational opportunities. It's just beyond frustrating. I don't understand why it's gone on so long. A simple motion to at least change the process so that seats and tiers are allocated by a percentage of applicants would go a long way in giving children who live in any corner of the city an opportunity to be included. I'm super frustrated when I went on the website today and saw that they had released the schools that are considered to be Title I. I've gone down a rabbit hole. I've gone to the DESE website. I have calculated the poverty rate for the charter school that my children attend to be above 40%. On the list released today, it's below 40%. There's likely a typo when it says it includes 5 years that doesn't include last year, but includes this year and then the 4 years before last year. So I don't know if it's incompetence, a mistake, a typo, but I shouldn't be going to the DESE website and getting the data and calculating that, again, a child from collegiate is going to be excluded. And you have to sign up if you're a charter school student for residency verification and to take the exam by Friday. So if you're publishing something today that basically tells a parent that it's a complete waste of time, that their child is not going to be admitted, that's a serious problem. I, again, don't know why things are going on so long. This is convoluted, it's complicated, it's inequitable, it's targeting kids for
seconds.
exclusion. It's just not right. I also want to point out that my older daughter had her composite score depressed by 4 complete points, in addition to having to compete with children who were given 8 extra points. You are using a double standard for calculating GPAs when you give BPS students the benefit of a special process when standard-based grades are used, but you refuse that special process for other students. It's not right.
Thank you very much. We will now transition to Zoom speakers. Please raise your hand and make sure you are signed into Zoom with the same name you're used to sign up for public comment, and be prepared to unmute yourself and turn on your camera. Raise your virtual hand when I call your name. Our first speaker is Councillor Worrell.
Good evening, everyone. Good evening, Chair Robinson, Superintendent Skipper, and the members of the school committee. I'm here once again this school year in the spirit of collaboration as the City Council is preparing to kick off fiscal year 2026 budget discussions for the Boston Public Schools with a hearing on November 14th. As Chair of the Ways and Means Committee, I'm respectful of the school committee's role as a primary force behind the BPS budget. However, as elected officials, seeking to uplift the voices of our constituents, the Council remains interested in providing an additional voice to guide the priorities of the FY26 budget. We know the main issues facing the Boston Public Schools, including facilities that have seen nearly a century of disinvestment, a transportation department that tries to serve a complicated web of priorities, a special education department tasked with meeting the needs of a wide range of students, the district-wide implementation of exclusive education, our open enrollment schools struggling to attract neighborhood students, the disparities in student achievements in an entire school system that has seen stalled overall academic growth and low literacy rates in recent years. There are no easy solutions to any of these problems, but I'm committed to leading a budget process on the Council to help Superintendent Skipper and Chair Robinson and the entire school committee to reach our ultimate goal, which is caring for our young residents from cradle to career and putting every student at Boston Public Schools on the path to success. I look forward to the next of many meetings and discussions on the Council, on the school committee, and in the community. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next speaker is Mike Heichman.
Mike Heichman, Dorchester, Beja. For most of us, last night was a bummer. One of the rays of sunshine was the passage of Question 2, which modestly limits some of the harm done by the MCAS system. Corporate interests led by the Boston Globe fought fiercely to defend the existing system. For them, fairness requires that every child in our Commonwealth, must master the same standards and to pass the same test. The fact that most of the children who live and go to school in wealthy Wellesley have far more opportunities, both inside and outside of school, than most of the children who live and go to school in Boston doesn't matter. And further, this should continue. The next step for the Commonwealth and for the BPS will be the creation of additional standards that all of our children will be required to master, with no changes to the same inequitable and racist system. Yesterday and today, I checked the doomsday clock. It is still 90 seconds before midnight. Scientists call this historical period the sixth mass extinction. The current educational system is designed to prepare our children to live in the past. If we want to change course and prepare our children for the future, I believe that essential questions need to be asked and answered. My essential questions are: 1, what kind of educational system must we create so that our children will join us and soon lead our efforts to save our planet? 2, what will our children need to know and do before they graduate high school? 3, what kind of assessments will be used to measure progress? 4, what will all of our children be given so that every child will be successful? And 5, how will our children, their caregivers, our educators, and our community be involved in answering these questions? Horrible conditions have existed in our school system for generations. You have approved an austerity budget that has brought additional harm for our children this school year. Harmful policies are often chosen because they are cheaper than providing additional funds for successful policies. This must change. The horrible must become unacceptable and our deficiencies solvable.
30 seconds.
Negotiations with the BTU and their common good proposals are providing you with many opportunities to improve teaching and learning. I call on you to quickly come up with an agreement with the BTU. I applaud the school system for its program involving our students as poll workers. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Travis Marshall.
Good evening. My name is Travis Marshall. I live in Roslindale, and I'm a parent of students at the English High School and the Bates Elementary School. I'm speaking tonight about the BTU contract negotiations as they pertain to the rollout of inclusion across the district and the lessons we can learn from schools that have a decade of experience with a proven inclusion model. Both of my kids went through a full inclusion elementary school at the Bates, which began rolling up inclusion from K0, K1 in 2014. They benefited from the scaffolds that their teachers built, which ensured they and their classmates could access and understand the curriculum through different modes of learning. Inclusion at the Bates worked because kids learn differently and because kids are much more complicated than a checkbox or a single diagnosis. But the biggest reason that inclusion at the Bates worked is that it was inclusion done right. Each classroom is staffed with a classroom teacher as well as an inclusion specialist alternating with a paraprofessional, and each classroom is capped at 20 students per class. This staff-to-student ratio ensures that each student gets what they need, because we know that a single teacher with multiple licenses is not multiple teachers. School leaders of the Bates fought to keep this model in place because it works. Unfortunately, BPS has ignored the inclusion planning team recommendations and plans to increase inclusion class sizes without any additional staffing. District plans that ignore the experience of staff and students create situations where students are not receiving the services they are legally owed. For example, I know of EL strands where teachers rely on the students themselves to translate material for their peers because of a lack of staffing. Inclusion done right means a consistent staff-to-student ratio. Inclusion done right means multiple licensed educators, including a SPED certified educator. Inclusion done right means listening to the people who have crafted a successful model and supporting them as they continue to implement it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Our last speaker is Gabriela Hernandez. Gabriela
Sorry.
Hernandez.
Yes, I'm here. I'm sorry. I'm having some difficulties with the camera.
Okay.
It says that it's working, but I don't see it working. Do you see me?
No. Just a second. I'm asking. Yeah, it's not working. But Chair. Yeah, you can go ahead.
Okay. Um, First of all, I agree with Travis. My name is Gabriela Hernandez. I'm from the Jamaica Plain neighborhood, and I'm so very grateful to be able to be here and advocate for my kids' education, especially my daughter, who is in the spectrum with a diagnosis of severe autism disorder. We got her diagnosed very early on before she was 2 years old. We started right away with services as early intervention and ABA, and we were always present. That was one has to be when this session happened. We saw her progress and we saw her regressions when service was not available due to staff shortage. And we understood from there the importance of consistency for any kid with special needs that relies on support services to function on their everyday to day. Our daughter started school in 2021. Starting from the beginning, it was really hard to contact someone from the Department of Education. I call every single day for a follow-up to get an assessment for my daughter since she was going to turn 3 and will be 70% harder to find the services that she needed. Finally, I got the call back and the assessment was done. She got a placement, thankfully at the same school that my son was attending, since she was already familiar with the building. Her first teacher was amazing. She really made a difference in our life and gave us confidence that our daughter was in good hands. But there was a background. The para of the classroom had left in November of the school year, and she had managed to run the classroom with the minimal help that was offered. She was burnt out, and although there was a para for the next school year, she left the school. My daughter was heartbroken. It took her some time to adjust to the new normal, but she did. After that, the para with whom she had bonded had to go to another classroom because she was more needed in their old classroom the classroom that my daughter was in. Thankfully, there were more staff members that are so kind and passionate to what they do that made it possible for her to adjust to the changes. She's in K2 now and has amazing teachers, a speech therapist that she loves, and classmates that interact with her. As a mother, I understand the amount of time that requires to keep her safe and engaged. She's a very, very active girl and often gets hurt because she runs and falls down. The times where her classroom struggle to find staff cover, she will be so distressed because she will not get the support she needs, and she is not the only student with a condition. There is at least 5 kids with an IEP or a 504 in her classroom, and I couldn't begin to imagine the load of work for her teacher and her colleagues because a kid with autism is a lot. Imagine 5, and that's only the ones that are diagnosed.
30 seconds.
We have laws like FIPA and IDEA that state that the law provides what the IEP services are required. Why do we have to go to so many disruptions in the routine? I'm now in training to hopefully join the BPS force and help resolve the delays. But now that I spend time in the classroom, I see up closely the struggle, the lack of resources, the individual needs that are not met, the size of the classroom and the amount of students with needs that are not met to be attended. And just as my daughter, how affected they are when
your time is up.
Okay.
Chair, that concludes public comments.
Thank you, Ms. Parvex, and thank you to those of you who spoke this evening and shared your perspectives. Your testimony is very important to us. Our first action item this evening is the grants for approval totaling $1,960,484. Now I'd like to turn it over to the superintendent for any final comments.
Thank you, Chair. So before you tonight, the 3 key grants totaling 1.696 million First is a targeted assistance grant for $800,000. This will serve 18,000 students and approximately 2,000 staff in transformation schools for 2025. The TAG grant is used to pay stipends at the school level for teacher leadership, professional learning, as well as curriculum implementation. The second is a food security infrastructure grant for $410,484. This is a new grant intended to serve 54,000 students in school year 2025. The grant will allow our Food and Nutrition Services Department to really become the single source of meal preparation for all BPS students, regardless of whether they're in a building with kitchen facilities or not. And then lastly, there's an early college support grant for $750,000. This is a continuation grant which serves about 500 students, school year 25, provides resources to support the designated early college programs that we have, seeking to continue and to really help our high school students and school leaders reimagine high school experience. And this is a key component for our secondary schools. So I would just ask, I know that Chief Financial Officer Bloom is here for any follow-up questions. I would just urge the committee to give a favorable vote for the 1.96 package.
Question, Superintendent, I know that we went to Fenway High, last week, and we did meet the staff that run the career and college pathway. So my assumption is this is, as you said, this is a continuation, so this will continue to support what they're already doing there, right?
Yeah, so any of the schools that have the designated early college, those dollars are intended to help support and continue it. You're welcome.
I have a question regarding, are we tracking the growth of the early college programs, and are there plans to expand those at other high schools?
There are. So this is a big push of ours right now, is to have all high schools be able to get the early college designation. We're also encouraging the state to be more flexible in what that designation looks like for when we could offer it, for instance. But yes, we're tracking year to year, both the students' completion of the programming, taking the best practices and making sure we're kind of sharing those, and then really encouraging the high schools to think about which particular programs they would like to bring in as pathways, both for early college and for the career pathways. So that's intended to go across the high schools.
Question. So Superintendent, the food and nutritional services one, the infrastructure. So is that for the central kitchen that services the school buildings that don't have kitchens?
Yeah, so there's actually there's an innovation. I can't say enough about food service and just how they're thinking boldly and innovatively. But this is really to allow satellites to be able to cook and prepare food for those sites that do not have kitchens internally. So that could be central kitchen, but it could also be some of our other kitchens that are bigger in particular key areas of the city, act as that satellite.
Yeah, exactly right. So it's more for equipment for them?
Yeah, so it's equipment and also some upgrades to electrical and plumbing to get online. I think there's 14 schools that'll then be the recipients of fresh meals.
Thank you.
Anything else?
Quick question about the early college program. I was wondering how the available classes are decided for students, and if they get to decide what kind of interest they want to explore, what they want them to.
Yes, this is a great question. So generally it's school leaders working with the teachers, staff, students to determine what are the areas of major or interest that students would want. And then it's looking at, we try to kind of partner with community college or four-year that are in that area. So we reduce travel time as much as possible. And then try to find what that matches.
Thank you all. If there's no further discussion, I'll now entertain a motion to approve the grant as presented. Is there a motion? So moved. Thank you. Is there a second? Is there any discussion or objection to the motion? Is there any objection to approving the motion by unanimous consent? Hearing none, the grants are approved. Tonight, we have one presentation, which is a Mass Core graduation requirements update. Let's aim to keep the presentation under 20 minutes, and I'll now turn it over to the superintendent.
Thank you. So while secondary superintendent Lombardi is kind of getting set up, I'm just going to talk a little bit about the background of this. So back in May of 2021, Boston School Committee voted to adopt DESE's Mass Core framework as a graduation requirement for BPS students. Mass Core is scheduled to begin with that graduation requirement for the class of 2026, which, as a reminder, is today's juniors. The policy supports high quality academic foundation and the experience that we believe all students should have by the time they graduate. Tonight, we want to update the committee on the steps the district has taken to implement the Mass Core since that policy vote in 2021. A few of the things that we want to cover: implementation of high quality instructional materials and equitable literacy, course scheduling assistance that continues to be provided to schools, the addition of more than 50 full-time employees or FTEs across 30 schools to support implementation in the elective areas, and the expansion of early college, which we just started to talk about, innovation in CTE pathways across the secondary schools. As I mentioned, the Mass Core policy being passed in May of 2021, that was actually 4 months before most high school students came back to school for the first time. They had been almost 18 months remote because of the pandemic. We've learned a lot since the students have returned about the impact of the pandemic on high school students, all students, but in this case, secondary students, both here in BPS, statewide and nationally. And in this presentation, the team will outline a bit about some of the technical and the adaptive challenges that we're still enduring as we kind of go into the implementation phase of this. The percentage of students completing Mass Core requirements has doubled, which is amazing when compared to the class of 2020 to the class of 2024. So we're at 51% of students in the class of 2024 having completed Mass Core requirements in all subject areas. That mirrors, just to give you a sense, the numbers across the state, where it's roughly half of all high school students are meeting those Mass Core requirements before graduating. So really running on par with the state. It's a good place to be. While we've definitely made significant improvements toward the full implementation of the Mass Core, we know that there's additional work that needs to happen to have structures in place so that all students can actually meet the rigor of those graduation requirements. So tonight you're going to get a flavor. Dr. Ted Lombardi is going to start it off. He's our secondary superintendent for college, career, and life readiness. You're also going to hear from Chief of Teaching and Learning, Leslie Ryan Miller, and they're going to explain kind of a combination of where the district is, what we've done, and then what are some of the adaptive challenges we see. We'll also be joined, which is our privilege, to have school head of the Margarita Muniz, Danya Vasquez, who's here, as well as Ben Halfett, who's the head of data. And I think it's really important to hear principal voice in this at the secondary level, because they can bring to life the real challenges that do happen, progress that's been made, but also some of the real challenges that we still have to work through. So at this point, I'll turn it over to you, Dr. Lombardi, and then we can have a robust, excellent conversation on this.
Great. Thank you so much. And thank you to the committee for your attention to this. I want to just start by going back to what the current policy is. And back in 2021, as the superintendent mentioned, the school committee voted to adopt the Mass Core framework as a universal graduation requirement for BPS. We're committed to the principles and ideals set forth in that, and the idea that universalizing graduation requirements has long been an issue that we wanted to tackle in BPS, and this takes a massive step toward doing that. We recognize that this policy supports the high-quality academic foundation and experience that we believe all students should have at graduation. That was the point in the policy 3 years ago, and that is what we've pursued since then. I think we've made really good growth since then as well. Again, as I just said, this policy really started to standardize some of our graduation requirements. And if you look across our requirements now in BPS high schools, every secondary school in BPS has the academic core subject requirements that mirror Mass Core. So ELA, math, 4 years each, 3 years each of social studies and science. Where there is some differentiation is in world language, though most of our schools do offer 2 years of world language, and then in what electives are offered across schools. And that is one thing that is not exactly aligned with MassCore yet, but we're moving toward in most of our schools. So on the right side of the slide, you see what are the MassCore framework. The other piece in here that is a bit of a, it's just listed differently, so I want to explain it, is the physical education requirement, which is a state law that physical education is given in some form in each year. That becomes a bit of an issue for high schools because of the way scheduling happens. It's difficult to schedule things for less than a semester. So those physical education requirements can fit into elective courses, but it can be a little bit difficult to fit all of them together and give students other elective courses if a whole semester of PE is offered every year. And just as a guide, other districts do use the MassCore framework. Like the superintendent said, there was massive variability in MassCore attainment across districts. Just a quick scan of particularly the urban districts in the state right now, you see MassCore completion percentage as low as around 20, in some urban districts that are nearly 100. So it's really all over the place. Some of it is in the reporting and sort of how courses are reported. So there's a bit of variability there as well. But districts are in very different places in how they've implemented this across the state. I do want to bring my friend and colleague, Leslie Ryan Miller, up to explain just a couple of things contextually that I think you probably know a lot about at this point, but to help in this discussion.
Good evening, school committee. Thank you for having me. Just to talk a little bit about what has transpired since the initial vote related to MassCore. Certainly something that you all have heard a lot about, ensuring that our students have access to high quality instructional materials, meaning that they have access to grade level standards aligned instruction. So we are now at about 87% and continuing to grow. And so that, as Dr. Lombardi spoke about, just provides foundation of high quality instruction for our students, which is critically important to the work. And then secondly, talking a little bit about our course catalog review. We have a course catalog that has hundreds and hundreds of courses. And I think there was some time where that course catalog had not really been tended to, so that we could look at what courses remained, what courses we may need that weren't there, as well as old courses that needed to be taken out of the catalog. So I'd love to shout out Executive Director of STEM, Beth Maluski, and Angela Headley Mitchell, who's the Executive Director of Humanities. They really took on the bulk of that work with their teams, and they did a couple of things. First, they reviewed all the courses to see what was aligned to MassCore and what was not, and labeled it as such. This is really important because we don't want any schools, students, families to be surprised when it's graduation time and see that there are courses that they've taken that are not MassCore compliant. So labeling those courses, that's incredibly important. The other piece that's also important is making sure that every course has a linked syllabi so that we understand exactly what that course is teaching, the standards, the objectives that are being met, so that if a parent has a question, if a teacher has a question, if a student has a question, we can be very clear about what was to be covered in that course and its relationship to MassCore. Again, I already spoke about this, but just removing old courses that were not aligned to standards, were not high quality, or were not aligned to post-secondary expectations. Those courses needed to be removed, and we've removed a number of courses from the catalog. And then lastly, something that I think was quite impactful is that Beth and Angela led a process where they met with any secondary school that wanted to meet with them to walk through and really audit the courses that they were offering and talk with guidance counselors and registrars about MassCore, the courses, and if we needed to shift potential titles of courses to make sure that it was aligned both to the content and to, again, ensure that it was MassCore compliant. This is really important just to make sure that student reporting is accurate and we know what students have taken. And I know that Danya took part in that process with Beth and Angela. That's something that certainly she can speak to if you'd like to hear more. Thank you.
So just a couple of things on this slide to highlight is one step that we made in particular after the vote in 2021 was trying to address some of the staffing issues that schools had in terms of being able to meet Mass Core. As I said before, with English, math, social studies, and science, the staffing issues were largely balanced across schools and ready to take on Mass Core. The issues came in physical education and world language and the arts. So through that process, we met with each high school at that time. It was the Division of Academics that was doing it at the time. And over 50 FTEs were allotted across 30 schools to address some of those staffing issues. I just want to note that while it addressed some of the staffing issues, there are other impediments to some of these electives, right? You think about PE, some of that has to do with space, right? Not all of our schools have gyms or spaces to do any form of PE. But we did address some of the staffing issues that were in front of us through that process back in the 2021-22 school year. And then finally, just on a broader lens, and I appreciate Dr. Elkins bringing this up earlier around the early college expansion. We've expanded our pathways massively across the secondary schools in the last 4 years. We've had 10 new early college pathways, 6 new innovation career pathways, and 4 new CTE pathways that have started just in the last 4 years, in addition to a pretty wide swath that already existed in the district. And I just want to note in that there's a misnomer about this, that the coursework in CTE and innovation career pathways interfere with Mass Core, and it's actually in the planning process, both from DESE and locally, we ensure that any pathway that exists would be Mass Core compliant. So I just want to make sure everyone knows that the students that go into pathways, it is an assumption that they will be able to complete Mass Core through their studies. I do want to go through a few bits of data with you.
Excuse me.
Yeah.
A reminder, could you please slow down?
Oh, yes, I'm sorry.
Sorry.
Thank you, Lena. My apologies. So what you're looking at in this first data slide is each component of the Mass Core requirement, the 4 core subject areas, plus foreign language, arts, and then additional elective credits. The light blue bar on the left is the class of 22. The dark blue bar on the right is the class of 2024, and that is the percentage of completion of those requirements among the graduates in those 2 classes. So you can see, on average, about a 10 to 15% bump in each of those areas in those 4 years. That is sort of the data that undergirds this next slide, which is going back to total Mass Core completion. This completion of all of the metrics that you saw on the previous slide, all of the years required. The dotted line in the middle is our starting point from the 1920 school year, was a 25% completion rate for that class, up to our most recent class where we're up to 51% across all students. What you do also see here, though, is persistent achievement gaps among races in BPS. You see the white and Asian students in the 70 percentile, Black and Latinx students at 46 and 44% respectively. So while the total number has risen, we have not been able to close those gaps as of yet. You'll see similar numbers in this next slide, which is by student group, by low-income students, students with disabilities, and English language learners. Again, the dotted line is all students. And while you do see growth, you still do see a persistent gaps that mirror the racial gaps that you saw on the slide before. So we do want to call that out. So moving forward, we've made significant progress to close this gap and make our schools as Mass Core compliant as we can in the past few years. Our schools have done incredible work to do that, and you're going to hear a bit from Danya and from Ben about the work that they've done at the Muniz and at BADA and the obstacles that still exist. So we wanted to make sure that in giving you this update, we gave you a full picture of not only the present state of affairs, but also the obstacles that we anticipate having to overcome in the next couple of years to get to the finish line here. One of those obstacles is bell schedules. Many of our schools, over half of our high schools, run schedules that offer 6 periods in them, a 6-period day. Mass Core requires 22 credits for graduation. A 6-period bell schedule offers you 24 classes, 24-year-long units of study over the course of your high school career. That is a really difficult margin for error for students. That's only 2 classes of kind of extra. And if you are an English language learner, particularly ELD 1, you're going to have to take an extra class for that. If you're in ELD 2 or in ELD 3, same. If you are a resource room student, you have taken extra class or resource room supports. So when you add on those classes in a given year, it makes it nearly impossible to complete the full requirement in a 6-period day. So we have worked with schools. Some of our schools have shifted to more periods in their school day. There are limitations around time on learning. There are plenty of reasons as we came out of the pandemic that schools wanted to stick with 6-period days because they gave more time on learning and time for recovery for students. But I just wanted to raise that as an existing obstacle. Further than that, I just mentioned the multilingual learners and students with disabilities issues with the scheduling. Our plan is to establish working groups in the short term with school leaders and other stakeholders to brainstorm how to overcome some of those issues. Again, some of them are just issues of time, but there are some non-traditional and innovative ways that schools have attacked this problem and got students' requirements through some non-traditional ways. So we're addressing that as well. In the alternative education space, and Principal Helfat can talk to this more specifically than I can, our average alternative ed student enters their alt ed setting at about 17 or 18 years old and typically has less than 2 years of high school credit completed. So again, to reach this threshold of 22 credits with the requirements within is a difficult task for a student who's starting very late in this process. And it is a stated goal of ours to engage as many students as possible and keep students engaged to the finish line, to give students as many opportunities as possible to graduate. But we don't want to put an impediment in front of them. So we would like to think about some alternative proposals for alternative ed down the road, to think about how we can engage them and get our alternative education students credits toward graduation that meet the standard, but meet the standard through multiple means. And then finally, we just want to highlight the post-pandemic recovery that we've talked about a couple of times in this presentation. Schools weren't sure what they were going to be seeing in September of 2021 when students returned to buildings. We saw a large amount of social emotional support that was needed. We saw students that were not used to being physically in social spaces with each other. So schools needed to take more intentional time to address those issues. And part of that is longer times in classrooms as well. So I just want to raise that as well as we think about how, if our priority is to reach the mass core threshold and give students the opportunity to access all 22 credits that are offered, we need to also balance the idea of how do we support students and their social emotional learning as we move forward. And that was something that's been front of mind for many of our school leaders since returning from the pandemic. So ironically enough, one of our pictures is of actually Principal Vasquez on the left there at graduation. So I would like to invite Danya Vasquez and Ben Helfat up, if they can speak a little bit about their experiences in implementation of Mass Core in their respective schools.
Good evening, everybody.
Good evening.
Good evening. Sure. Nice to be here. Nice picture of me. I'm glad you got the back of my head. I have a lot of feelings about Mass Core. It's been quite the journey. Mary and I have talked last year quite a few times. And I've worked closely with colleagues, Leslie and all the folks back here sitting here. Hope they're still talking to me. There's a lot of G-chats, a lot of loving arguments, because it is a hard process. And I want to start by saying that I know that the intention of Mass Core is to make sure that we're lifting up every student, and it is an intention embedded with equity. And my experience is that right now that we're not hitting that mark around equity. And I think Ted's slides really did illuminate that really well. It was intended to be a framework that's a one-size-fits-all framework. But our schools are not one size fits all. We are not all serving the same demographics, the same programming in our schools. And so for some schools, this may be easier to address, and other schools more challenging because we're presented with a lot of other requirements. And so I want to layer the requirements of special education, layer the requirements of multilingual learners, inclusion. We started early college this year. So there are a lot of layers that one needs to think about with Mass Core above it all. My experience was much what Leslie described. It took more than a year and a half, which was somewhat frustrating, to be honest with you, and very time intensive, very labor intensive on our team's part. And the district team's part, because they heard a lot from us. And that meant that we had to do an audit, we had to do an analysis. We have always given our kids more than what Mass Core requires. So we require for math, for science, for Spanish, etc. Where we were really stuck is as a dual language high school trying to do something innovative, recasting it to fit what we don't fit in, like a box that we don't fit in, and figuring out those course codes and recasting the curricula and getting approval and then getting those codes and then having to go backwards and fixing transcripts to make sure that the students that are supposed to be graduating under Mass Core have the correct transcripts. That sounds simple in a one sentence, and it took a lot of effort and a lot of time. I think we're pretty much there with maybe some tweaks around the edges, around PE and some other questions that are not yet quite clear, that we keep going back and forth around. But it has been quite the process. And I do want to raise the last issue and then give it over to Ben, that I hope that we can forward innovation and creativity and not put us all in a box. I don't agree around sort of telling schools you all have to do one kind of a schedule or another, which was the original intent. I think that we have to really think carefully about what's best instruction, what's best practice, and what are the 22 credits? Why are we asking 22 credits? What do those really mean? What's the value proposition?
Good evening. I think I'm speaking mostly for BADA, but I know that I share a lot of my concerns with my alt ed friends as well. But I think that as we look at Mass Core, we're hitting some significant obstacles that we don't really have a way around yet. I have students who come in at 19. I have 2 years at most with them, and 85% are ELD ones, which means that every single one of those students needs 135 minutes in their schedule that has nothing to do with these Mass Core requirements. And I think as we look at that, first thing, the ability of bringing students from 0, 5, even sometimes 8 credits all the way up to 22 in 2 years is not something mathematically that we are able to do. And then you add on top of that the needs that they come in with, the struggles that we're dealing with to hit the core and hit it well for these students so that they can move on to the next step is something that we're really focusing on. And as we talk about adding on top, that's really not something that we have figured out how to do. And I think we are significantly, we're looking at, I mean, every time this comes back around and we talk about it, I would be looking at about 50% of my students who are not graduates. And that's just the reality of what it looks like at this moment. They will not hit the credit count before they turn 22. And I just want to be present to the fact that if we can't figure out how to do this well, all we're doing is chipping away at the work that we're trying to do for those students. And I think that that's been hard for us. I think that all of my alt ed colleagues are dealing with a measure of this in some way, shape, or form. We're all dealing with students who are coming back and trying to get it done. And I think that as we look at increasing credit counts, it often feels like obstacles put in their path. And I think that that's certainly not the intention, but it is certainly how it feels as we're moving forward, as a student re-engages and wants to do well, and they know they have 2 credits to go, and then we say, no, we actually need 6 credits to go. That's the reality of what we're doing day to day. And I just want to be present to the fact that that's what it feels like in our school.
Okay, can I just add one other group of students, given our current climate in across cities, are the students who are coming from other countries, who are 10th and 11th graders, 12th graders, older students, and really interpreting their transcripts and giving them the proper credit is really a challenge because we don't want to penalize them because now we have this particular framework that they have to match when maybe in their country or maybe in another district or in another state they didn't have the same requirements. And so that also becomes a challenge, so we need more guidance so that we're consistent in how we are welcoming those students into our communities.
Thank you both so much for that. I just want to call out before we go into questions that we do have a number of folks here able to answer questions sort of around different areas. So in addition to Danya and Ben and Leslie, we have Caitlin Gilligan, who's our Executive Director of School Counseling Services, Beth Maluski, who's our Executive Director of STEM, Angela Headley Mitchell is back here, snuck in on me, didn't realize, so I turned around, is our Executive Director of Humanities. Jill Carter is our Senior Executive Director of Health and Wellness, and Secondary Superintendent Tanya Freeman Wisdom is in the back and willing to jump in as well. I know if you have a question that is relevant to her. So I just wanted to call that out for folks when we get into the discussion. Thank you.
That's great. And just want to thank staff, right, and the school leaders whose day started extremely early for being here. I think, I think there's so much good news to celebrate about this in the progress that we've made on particularly the core side of it. I think the part that we need to continue at working with leaders and recognizing the differences of the students we serve and the different ways they come in and out of the system is to, over the course of time, figure out how do we create alternative pathways for them to be able to still get the diploma. I do think this is going to become more of a statewide conversation now with question 2 having passed. And so in many ways, we're ahead in that way because we've already done a lot of this deep work and we have some framework for this. But I do think it also just continues to come up and remind us, no matter what we're talking about, whether it's closures, consolidations, frameworks for graduation, it's not a seat, it's a kid. And our kids have different journeys. And that means we have to build a system that is flexible, nimble, and inclusive of those differences, but still have a strong academic foundation and bar. And I think that's what we're really trying to strike here and be as creative as possible, in that. So I always applaud our leaders because they're just always trying to be as innovative as possible to get the kids what they need. And I think you see that just knowing all the work Danya did on the coding with our staff. And to Danya's credit, pushing in a good way to think differently is so important at the district level for us to receive. And then our team did receive that and picked it up. And I think with Ben, when we think about BADA, we know BADA is so important that we're creating BADA East. Right? We know that's how important that model is to our overaged multilingual learners. So I think we have so much to learn from just these 2 schools alone, let alone the rest. So with that, we'll open it for questions.
Thank you so much for your presentation. It was so quick, but very informative. I just appreciate how, straightforward to the point. Of course, I have concerns just overall with multilingual and students with disabilities. I can understand that we've seen an increase, but I'm just concerned of folks that are supposed to be graduating in 2026, if they're actually going to meet those requirements, given that they have all these other requirements beyond math score or need more time. I can tell you, like, when I transitioned to the district, I was an ASL student, so I didn't necessarily face that. I actually had a lot of time in my schedule in supporting the leadership at Burke at the time by supporting other seniors, actually being a teacher assistant for an MCAS prep for students that were multilingual. So it worries me, like you mentioned, we do have students that come from other countries or other states or whatever, depending when they come, because they don't always come right in the beginning of the school year. Sometimes they come in the spring. And now we're trying to figure it out, MCAS now might not be necessarily another requirement that they have to look into. So how holistically that means for them as well. But I am concerned there. So we'd love to hear more. What is the plan when it comes to those specific communities? Because they deserve to also just be able to go to extracurricular programs. They deserve to go to career and college prep programs. It shouldn't be like, you can't do that because you're an ESL student and you have other requirements. That feels more of a priority because it is graduation. I get it. So if you could talk more or provide any more details, or what are next steps for us to prepare?
Yeah, so it's a great question, and it is exactly the problem that these folks are facing. And I think, everything that we do in schools is a bit of a balance between wanting to be standardized and also wanting to give students a unique experience based on the schools that they're at and the schools that they've chosen, and the schools that can serve them best, right? That is the balance and the uniqueness of having a large network of high schools and not being a district that has one high school like a lot of districts are. So I think in a more formal way, the plan is to learn from, and this is, one of the reasons why we particularly wanted these two leaders here tonight, is that they've really acutely had to attack these problems because their population is such that they had no choice but to start off to go hard at how to adapt their schedule for Mass Core, because their entire population is impacted by some of these issues that we raised tonight. So a big part of it is just learning from those experiences. And the other part of it is that we are really just learning, right? This group that we are tracking so heavily toward Mass Core is just at the beginning of their junior year. So at the end of last year is really the first time where we have kind of on track, off track data for them specifically. So the plan for us now is to convene working groups of our school leaders and other stakeholders, maybe teachers. We're open, to other members to discuss some innovative ways to approach those problems. Some schools have been able to, satisfy certain requirements, to schedule PE in a different way that doesn't necessarily take a full semester. Some schools have been able to embed, other requirements within other classes. So I think that's the piece that will help us, within the margins, be able to offer students the supports that they need, but also give them the chances for enrichment. Because that's the last thing we want to do, is limit any student's ability to take the wonderful things that their schools offer, right? That's the other piece.
And that is, I just want to double down on that relative to alternative education and our ed options. For too long, we've had two sets of standards, and we should not. Like, we want to ensure that our students who are using our alt ed system as a different way to get their diploma and go on to college and a career, that they are getting the same level of academics and resources that other students get, and the same opportunities, to your point. I think we find ourselves also in the interesting situation now that, with question 2 having passed, this is going to become a state conversation. So we also want to see what the state's thinking, what kind of guidance might be out there, what's the best practice that is happening in other districts like ours, where we have overage multilingual learners, or where we have concentrations of special education multilingual learners, where the schedule is the tightest. Ted and his department along with Leslie and teaching and learning, are doing really good deliberate work with the schools around schedule. So in some cases, some schools are opting to change from a 6 period to a 7. But to Danya's point, it's not one size fits all. There's lots of good reasons to keep a 6. Just the teaching time alone, or if you take say an arts academy where you've got rehearsal, you just can't get kids in and out, or a heavy STEM school where you've got lots of lab. So there's no one size fits all with the schedule. But that said, that is one of the solution sets we look at. I think the other thing is, Danya's is a great example of really being creative with the curriculum, the standards, and the coding to be able to do that match. But as she pointed out, it's very time consuming.
Yeah.
So that's, why, we're bringing it to you now that we actually have the first real set of data to look at from this class. But we will come back in the spring when we've seen what the state is going to kind of talk about to this, when we've continue to work with the schools to sort of see how that class progresses. And then we'll likely have some recommendations for alternative pathways or for exemptions for students that are coming in and out of the system late or at different points.
Thank you for that, Superintendent. I'm all for standards. I think it's just when I think about those particular communities, we need to think about how we're actually preparing them to meet those standards in an equitable way, just like a student that is not multilingual or does not have like a disability. I think that's the issue for me. Even with question 2, I was like, have it or not, if you're not really gonna prepare, our multilingual students and students with disability to navigate MCAS, you know what I mean? So as you said, we're still trying to learn more from the state. What does that actually look like? And I think it could be an opportunity to explore how we now utilize the time to get students to actually meet the math score standards, since that is something that we still have to be compliant on. And happy to sit at the table and look at the whiteboard and see how we can make that work. Thank you.
The other interesting part is, which I think is a great Tetra problem, is, you now have high schools 7-12, and they don't always sequence things. Like they'll start things in the 8th grade that typically would have counted as a high school credit. And so, that alone may need us to come back and make some recommendations about the language piece of it so that we can pick that up and count that toward the actual mass core 9-12.
Very naive question. So I'm looking at one of the slides, particularly slide 14 in the appendix, and trying to better understand how many of our schools are taking advantage of, I guess, what would be pathway 3. And because I guess the way that I'm visualizing it is that your courses can come in three different ways, but it sounds like this third pathway allows for more flexibility from schools to develop something that's more customized to what their students would be able to benefit from. So I'm just wondering how many of our schools are actually engaging in that particular pathway?
So just top of my head, there's a handful. I would say most of our alternative ed schools would qualify in that third category because a couple do, but a lot don't have world language requirements in the alternative ed space. That is, and the superintendent might have a little bit better history of this, because I think this was sort of a pilot school of that era of that pathway 3. But again, the thing I would say as a sort of universal is that the English, math, science, and history requirements across all of our schools, alternative ed or not, are 4 years of English and math and 3 years of history and science. So that is a universal, regardless of pathway. The variability is in the world language and the arts and the elective space. So that would be more the schools that would qualify under pathway 3 that don't have those requirements the same way as they're listed in 1 and 2.
Have we had conversations with our alt eds about what would they feel required courses would be for their particular group of students?
We have. We went through a process last year. There's a monthly meeting with all of our alt ed leads that our director of educational options, Carlos Diaz, runs. And we did talk through what this could look like next year and what this could look like in the future. And the general takeaway was that a universal number of credits across our alternative ed schools is not a bad idea, and that having elective options should exist. But the most important piece was that this idea of, I think for years, our mindset with alternative ed was we're getting kids to a diploma that wouldn't otherwise get there. And we have to shift our mindset to that's not enough either.
That's
right. That the extra piece has to be whatever the core credits and electives we offer, plus a true college or career experience in some way, shape, or form, whether it's a dual enrollment class, whether it's a work-based experience. That was the piece that came out of that conversation with our alt ed leaders that we'd love to push forward, and we're continuing to have those conversations.
Yeah, I mean, I think at the secondary level, we find a heavy array of autonomous schools. And so I think with the pathway 3, you get that. You also get some schools where, like Madison's a great example, where the world language has tension with vocational other side. like just fitting all the blocks. So that pathway 3 is sort of the relief. But I think, you know, what we've learned is that when we actually look at the standards and we look at the curriculum and we code it, a lot of what our schools are doing meet this. And so it's really just documenting that or codifying that for sure.
Just a second question is more of just a data question. As I know, this is the first round that we're receiving. So I guess my question was more along the lines of, we know that 42% of our students in the class of 2026 are on track. How does that track with previous cohorts? If we've looked at that,
It's
where they were.
Yeah. It seems like it's a bit ahead.
Right.
I wasn't sure if it was the absolute first cohort.
But recognizing that the class is like the alignment of all of the schools with the core subjects would not have been in place in the same way. So it's kind of, it's not apples and oranges, but it's like a little bit of apples and clementines or something. So.
That was the clarification I needed. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yo quiero felicitar a la Escuela Margarita Muñiz, su principal. Tuve la oportunidad de estar con los estudiantes, con ella, y de verdad que es vibrante estar en la Escuela Margarita Muñiz.
I'd like to congratulate the principal of the Margarita Muniz. I had the opportunity to be there, and it is really a vibrant community there. Had the opportunity to be there.
Gracias por el trabajo que están haciendo.
I thank you very much for the work that you're doing at the Margarita Muniz.
Han surgido muchas preguntas interesantes y quizás mi pregunta es simple, pero yo creo que no es menos cuciosa.
Many interesting questions have arisen. Mine might be simple, therefore it is important still.
Es con relación al dinero.
It has to do with finances, with the money, the budget itself.
Porque no todos los estudiantes tienen las mismas necesidades.
You have to consider not every student has the same needs. They have different needs.
Porque nuestros estudiantes multilingües, por ejemplo, necesitan un apoyo mayor.
You have to consider that our multilingual population of students, they need more support in that regard.
Los estudiantes que son aprendices del idioma inglés con discapacidad también.
The other population is the English language students with disabilities as well.
Y sé que es una conversación que vamos a continuar, ¿verdad? Pero quiero pensar cómo vamos a poder nosotros, estos desafíos, cómo vamos a poder superarlos.
So it is a conversation that has to continue. So it is critical to think, how is it that we are going to overcome these obstacles that we are seeing?
Y también tengo curiosidad por el currículo, cómo lo vamos a incorporar, cómo vamos a hacer esto.
I'm curious about the curriculum as well. How is it that we are going to implement it? How is it that we're going to do that with regards to the curriculum itself?
Yeah. Gracias, señora Polanco. I'm going to speak in English because I know we have the translator, pero gracias a usted. You hit on a very important theme, which is resources, right? The budget, people resources. And I think as schools are doing their audits and really digging into what the gap is, where they are, what the changes need to be, we are going to find more than 50 positions that were provided several years ago to be added. And so this is a resource question. And when we first started this journey, we always said that in the preliminary conversations. And so as schools are aligning the work, the district also has to align itself and consider how do we fill those gaps, because a school by itself is not going to be able to fill those gaps. And so I think that's a really important, and I'm so grateful that you've raised that. In schools that are serving high percentages of multilingual learners, students with disabilities, and students who have that nexus of both, we do need more resource allocation to really satisfy high quality instructional experiences for them that they deserve. And so right now we're sort of like at our school, we just fit You know, we're just making it, but one way or another, you know, a bad budget year or not, and I'm going to be going to see Mr. Bloom back here and have a lot of conversations. And so I think that's part of what I hope all of you can grapple with, because again, I'm going to say it, this is not a one size fits all approach. It cannot be. I know we have the boxes, and I'm one that doesn't like boxes. They worry me. And so I just hope that you can see that is a vision for our students, and where do we have the flexibilities with the right resources to make this really happen in a way that is truly equitable, because right now it is not equitable. We are not achieving the fundamental goal that it was set out to do. And the last thing I'll say is that it is very labor intensive. I think we did kind of pathway 3. I don't know if that's true, Leslie. We made up a lot of our own courses because we don't fit the typical profile. That's very labor intensive to really ask a group of staff to, you know, create that, send it back to academics for them to approve, go back and forth. It is labor intensive. It has a lot of detail to it. And so there are many, many angles across. It's a system approach. It's not just budget, it's budget, staffing. It impacted in our school staff licensing, the schedule, every facet of a school is impacted by how we're thinking about mass core. And so I think that conversely, we need to have the district think about how are you also in the game with us, so that you can align how you're thinking about resources, so that we are really truly partnering in this work.
Yeah, I think that's well said, and I also think, like, we learned something that Danya's been championing for a very long time, which is dual language has a different set of costs, right? Like just even materials and curriculum costs, and that's something that we've never differentiated, right, relative to even back when we were doing weighted student formula. So those are the things, you know, we learn. I think the other thing is when we do long-term or long-range initiatives, like that has the deep work attached, like this, or like the inclusive plan, we have to keep going back to make sure that the resource that's being allocated is the right level. And we have to be careful not to overcommit, because then we don't have enough resource and it's stretched too thin across too many things. So I think there's lots of things that we, as we go through this and navigate it, you know, we kind of learn from it. And the best thing we can do is to work closely with our leaders who are trying to do that implementation on the ground.
Thank you for your presentation. And just a quick remark, quick comment. Responding to, I hear you and I understand all the concerns regarding the alternative education dilemma that you are facing. I came to America without the alternative education program back then. So I, without a formal education in my country, it was pretty tough for me to, you know, to try to assimilate myself into the education system here without a formal high school education. So here now we have a alternative education, and I thought that great, that's gonna work for people like me, you know, a refugee from another country coming to America without much formal education. Maybe but now I hear you and I see, oh my God. So the only comment I could raise is that I understand the confinement of the box, and like you, I don't like box. I think we're boxed in since last night. But anyway, but I hear you, and you are the front line. You are the people working from the trench, so you have a lot of experience dealing with students that are over age, and need formal education for future purposes. Of course, you hear from them as well, their concerns, how they can fit their schedule into all that. So they may have, of course, you have your own ideas, you have your own suggestions, and they may have their own suggestions. So please forward them to us, forward them to the assistant superintendent here, the deputy superintendent. I don't really care for for a title, but you know what I mean. And make sure that I work, make sure that I follow with you, because I was that guy 50 years ago, so I know. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I want to say first, thank you all for the presentation. Great to have the school leaders that I know and respect and run wonderful schools. Congratulations again for Bada being a finalist for the School in the Middle Prize. Glad to see your school was recognized this year.
Thank you.
I do want to say though, because I don't often say this, but as members, we each bring unique experiences to the table, right? And that's the beauty of us working together as a committee, because we all bring different perspectives and different experiences. And Ms. Lima Barbosa, the way you start off the questions by talking as a former English language learner yourself, right? And I just want to call that out and say how much I appreciate it, because we each bring different experiences and we've heard it from each of the comments so far. So, we had that number of votes last night, but the vote about MCAS as a graduation requirement, and whether you supported removing it as a graduation requirement or wanted to stay as a graduation requirement, I think the commonality of agreement was there were a lot of concerns over MCAS. As the superintendent says a number of times, it's a system, right? And it was a one-size-fits-all solution, and I think many people felt that it should have better reflected the challenges that our schools face and the variety of populations that we serve. And so, I think everyone agreed that there were some challenges that way. This is a policymaking board, and we are committed to trying to have all of our students graduate ready for college or career or whatever their next step is. And as a policy we set a couple of years ago, it was, we believe it's better to have a common standard towards graduation. And built in the presentations at the time, it was prior to Superintendent Skipper joining, but members who were there at the time will remember, there was a lot of conversation about a long lead time, exactly to have these type of conversations, right? And so we knew there were going to be a bunch of challenges with it. And to hear the conversations between the school and the district, and some good, some challenging, right? But to see both the great work that has happened to date is very encouraging. To see the rise across the board for a number of standards, student populations is very encouraging. But this is also a real healthy conversation to hear what the challenges are in front of us, and to be able to break it down between schedules and the variety of other things, the nuts and bolts of how you turn a policy into implementation that benefits all of our students. And I'm tying this together with the conversation about should we or should we not have, that the state had, should we or should we not have MCAS as a graduation requirement? And the thought of the problem with it was as a system that was one size fits all, and it would have been better to try to adjust to fit the various populations. And so what I see here is almost a similar path, that I think the district is doing great work. I love this update. By the way, I think this may have been the first time in 3 years since we passed the policy that I think we've had a specific presentation on MCAS, so we can see the great work that's being done. We can thoroughly understand what the challenges are. What I hear from you, Superintendent, and correct me if I'm wrong, is you're still continuing to work on these challenges. You're working towards solutions, but you're kind of saying to us, as the rubber meets the road, be aware of the real difficulty of this last 10 yards to get into the end zone, so to speak. And now I just said a driving analogy and a sports analogy, and it's because my brain's a little muddled like all of ours. So that there's difficulty to get all the way for all of our students. So what I'm hearing is more of a heads up. Here's what we're doing. Here's what the challenges are. Here's what we're going to try to do. I'm sensing you're probably going to say, we'll be back to you.
Absolutely. We're going to come back in the spring. And I think that's right. And I think honestly, implementation work is the last 20 yards. You know, that's really where it's at. And that's the reason why initiatives either succeed or fail. So the fact that we're sort of laying this out and because we're working so closely with leaders to understand what the specific adaptive challenges are, because at this point it really is adaptive challenges. Those 20 yards, we're learning a lot, and what we want to be able to do is to have a policy that works for all kids. And so I think that's the piece that will come back, so that we can be very concrete and say, here's the exemption pieces we're considering, here's alternative pathways that we're considering, and at budget time, here's the resources that we know we're going to need to allocate to ensure that we can actually make sure the initiatives go through.
So I really appreciate this presentation, and I don't see it as an either or. Either it's going to be implemented or we're not going to be able to. I think it's going to be, we may need some creative solutions, working together with our school leaders who understand the issues the best, of here are some creative, and I think we're going to be working with the state because they're going to be giving guidance about what to do based upon the changes. So I think there's maybe some creative ways we can think about of how to close that gap to make it work for the schools, work for the district, the policy we've set, but most importantly, work for the students that we are trying to help prepare to graduate college, career, life ready.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I also think at the alternative education side, like, we're very excited because we now have some funding to do deep work within the alternative ed options, which is long overdue. And, you know, like, alternative ed and ed options they should not be stigmatized, dirty words, you know, or concepts. You know, we serve 49,000 beautiful students every day, and kids need different paths back and forth to be able to get to their finish lines. And that's really what educational options or alternative ed allows for. Where it gets dangerous is when we start lowering standard or saying alternative education is less than. And that's just something our team does not buy into. And so that's why I think, you know, as we get through the design work this year and working with school leaders and developing a true community of practice for the alternative education leaders, which they love being part of their peers at the high school level, but they also have unique needs and challenges, and they haven't really had a space to develop that out. And I think as they share that space, we'll actually see a lot of creativity come from them relative to the mass core component.
It's a question of how we are gauging a better sense of what schools are having. I imagine all of them are, but having a better sense of understanding which schools are having more challenges in implementing and making this reality. We've been fortunate to hear both of your stories like this evening. From a systemic standpoint, I guess I'm thinking about it in terms of like, well, then how do we know which schools need more of those resources per se on the implementation side?
Yeah.
So I'm wondering, just in the future, like, how we're going to be able to grapple with that and then sort of understand where we're directing our resources. So
Yeah, we can bring more data when we come back in the spring as well. But what we have is, you know, really a good swath of quantitative and qualitative data on this. So we have school by school, on track, off track for this particular class of 2026. We have it also by student groups. That's sort of the undergirding of the graphs that you saw. But we also, a lot of the team you see behind me here, we did a sampling of schools of different types to get more qualitative data around what are the struggles that, you know, heads of school, counselors, teachers are seeing with getting students to the finish line on this. So we've collected all of that already in a sample, but I think we need to broaden that scope as we go into, you know, needing further data.
Yeah, and I want to hold up something here, because I think in some districts, the level of analysis would stop at kind of what we shared initially, which is, we have good data that says that all of our high schools, with our alternative eds, are meeting the kind of the core part of math core in math, science, English, social studies, and then kind of like a range on the electives as we work through them. We're going to the student level. That's like a very different place, right? And that's actually the only place that we should be, is to see how that's actually then impacting individual students making that process. So otherwise, it's just kind of glittery, like 100%, 95%, and that actually is never going to help the kids. So I think what we're trying to do is really break it down and then understand at a granular level for students, which groups of students are actually getting left behind on it, so that we know the solution sets need to address that. And that's the level of data that I think the secondary office is working with the students on, with the secondary schools on.
Final question. Thank you, Chair. Superintendent, as you all are having conversations about inclusive education, and we have this challenge when it comes to math score, specifically for multilingual and students with disabilities. So are y'all having conversations with Dr. Chen and other folks about how, if and when the inclusion education proposal is implemented, can that also be seen as a potential solution of making sure that that we have co-teachers that are able to support in these core classes, right? To help make sure that folks are on track. I
Yeah.
don't know if those are conversations you're having, but
No, it's a
that's
great,
right.
question, right? And I think that does, I mean, I think MMA is like a great example of that, but I think that team component, right, that we've laid out with the inclusion plan, that's being activated as a solution set. I also, like we have unique, like with our multilingual learners, that tension point of ESL 1, ESL 2, which can't be delivered in the class, right? Like that is ESL. At the same time as they get into like ESL 3, where you can be creative with the team approach, it counts discreetly, plus you need an ELA. Like we see some tension points there that I think we just need to work on more. And like look at the schools that have been creative in how they're approaching that to say, what will work. But I do think IPT, in some ways, has a lot to learn from the mass core implementation, which is, when we look at it, what is working well, what's not working well, so that as we build out the next layer of it or the next class of it, we resolve as many of those issues as possible. And I know Dr. Chen is working on that with her team.
And how do you know how other districts that voted on implementing this not as a guide, how are they facing similar challenge? I know the district.
Yeah, it's interesting to try to get that data.
Okay.
So we're actually working with DESE on this, because what we'd really like to look at is examples of urban districts who have adopted it as a formal graduation requirement, which is different than using it just as sort of a guide. So we're kind of in dialogue with the state right now on that.
Out of it, it wasn't a requirement for the whole district. Each school committee voted on deciding if it was.
I
a
think
guide.
only about half of the schools in Mass right now at the secondary level follow the Mass core. I think this will be more of a conversation with MCAS option, right, gone away. I think more will help, but getting the data of which actually require it as a formal graduation, that is in process. We're trying to get some of that information right now and work with DESE on it.
I think what to me was most important is, well, first of all, thank you all for the presentation and for this update, which is quite exciting. But I think back to the conversation back in 2019 when we started this conversation, because at that point in time, it was, what is the requirement to graduate from Boston Public Schools? And it was whatever that particular school decides. And the overall question to all of us was, well, what's the value of a BPS diploma? If we've got 32 definitions of what it means to have obtained that credential. And so I think coming to Mass Core, was not sort of a cure-all for it, but it was something that was going to ground us to saying, here is something that a lot of our other colleagues across the Commonwealth are utilizing. And we know we have high schools where kids say, I can't get a foreign language class. They don't offer it. And so oftentimes our kids were graduating without things, not because they had failed them, is because we didn't offer them. And so getting to the point of having at least gotten to the point, I mean, we should be very happy. I mean, it's long overdue that we have, we have all of the, ELA, math, science, whatever that we need, and we're still working towards getting all of those other things in. But at the same time, schools today are not the same schools they were 50 years ago when that was all you needed. And the work that you're doing in terms of biliteracy and with all of the variety of kids with the variety of special needs and languages, I mean, we need a different type of school day, as well as different types of coursework and educators to fulfill all these needs. And so I really feel like we are sort of on an intentional pathway of coming up with a variety of models that will ground us, but we'll need to have the tweaks or the issues that are more determined by the nature of the program of those students. And that should be that way. But there should be something that can still say, we know every single student in BPS has gotten this foundation plus these tweaks because of what they need to have. And it's being delivered by quality educators and in a quality way, so that it's not just that we've got it on paper, that the actual experience merits all of the hard work everybody is putting into this, because then we can stand behind it and say, we are guaranteed that our students are graduating, not just with the paper that says check the boxes, but that the quality of what they got really is preparing them to go forth and be successful in whatever way they plan to be. So I just say thank you for getting us this far. Thank you to the district, because we have made investments that we weren't making, and we know we need many more. And we spend a lot of money in this district, and one day we will be spending it where it really needs to be spent and how. But it's first of all acknowledging the wonderful students that we have and the needs that they bring and the things that we try to bring back to them so that they can be successful. So, I mean, yeah.
So, sorry, this is a question. So back then, 2021, what was the particular rationale? And I think this goes to, your comment around, what was the particular rationale for making it a policy and not just a framework that we use for the district?
That's a good question. Do you remember why we decided?
Because school committee votes on policy, not on framework.
Well,
Well,
I'm just saying, but there's a rationale, right?
It may sound as a flip answer. I don't mean it that way.
No, of course. I'm throughout this entire conversation, it's just made me more curious around, like, what is the particular option for making it a requirement versus the flexibility that I think it affords you by just saying this is a guide and it's a framework. And so it's just again, this can be discussed offline. It's just one of those things of, yeah.
No, it's an interesting question, right? I think it was a recommendation from the superintendent at the time to establish it as a policy, because then that gives certainty to school leaders, to parents, to students, et cetera, that this is a requirement of the district as set by the school committee. But I think what we're hearing, and as you've fleshed out and we've all fleshed out, is there are nuances involved, particularly get to the point of full implementation. And so, that's the beauty of having a presentation like this, that we can understand it.
And that's why there was a several-year run also, that we knew that even if we made it a policy, it was not going to happen overnight. And in fact, we often did not know what it was going to take. But it was to sort of give everybody that message that we need to come together with something that's coherent for all of our students and not this sort of. I'll tell you what it was for me, and I'll be honest with it. We were at valedictorians luncheon. And we all get very excited about the valedictorians luncheon, except I was sitting with someone from one of our state colleges who said, "Huh, you're valedictorians. I've got one. She can't write a paragraph." And so and that was the issue is, so, yes, the valedictorian is the best student at that school. But the question is, what is that student's educational obtaining? And when your college colleagues are telling you your students can't write a paragraph, but they are considered a valedictorian, that's a pretty serious comment, whether it was one student or an off student, but just the idea that somebody that we are saying is the best, we are not providing them with a measure of, a measurement that says they have actually obtained X to be considered that. And then it was the issue of, well, what are the requirements? And the requirements are everywhere. So it was a way of beginning a conversation, I think, and that's where we are now, is that we've begun a conversation, we've gotten somewhere down that line, but superintendent has said too, we need to come back and take a look at it. And now we've got DESE and we're not quite sure what's going to happen there, but at least we know we've gotten somewhere and it's working, and we still have a ways to go and many detours or adaptations to fully support the variety of schools that we have.
We'll come back in April or May and kind of show you the progress that we've made. And I also think this is, this is also a commitment from our team that we need to provide school committee on an annual basis for these long range kinds of initiatives, real progress updates that have data. And that way there, if we do need to do any course correction at any point, we're doing it, in a nimble but efficient way. So thank you guys. Thank you very, very much to the leaders for your time. Go home and sleep. Thank you very much.
We'll now return to public comment. Ms. Parvex?
No public comments.
Thanks. Any new business? All right.
Chair.
Oh.
Two quick things. Superintendent, we heard during public comment earlier from a parent who mentioned that there may be a discrepancy between what is published on our site for the schools as well as the DESE data. If we could just make sure to look into that, particularly since there is a Friday deadline coming up.
Absolutely. Made a note of it and it's being looked at.
Thank you. And I just wanted to inform my fellow members that, we are members of the Mass Association School Committee, and they have their annual conference coming up this weekend. And one of the fun things they do is they name an all-state school committee, because the Mass Association School Committee is divided into 10 divisions. So they pick one school committee member from each division to honor as a member of the all-state school committee. And Boston is in Division 10. And the representative from Division 10 that is named to the All-State School Committee this year is our very own Chair Robinson. Being recognized for her work and leadership for us. So I just wanted to make sure to publicly acknowledge and that our chair is going to be honored this Friday night at the Mass Association School Committee Conference and be named to the All-State School Committee. Congratulations, Chair Robinson.
Thank you. It's Friday night.
Yeah, I know.
In Hyannis.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
It's like the all-star game.
Thank you.
I'm sorry, I just have one, following up with what he talked about, things that happened during the public comment. I'd like to have some staff or from you, some clarification regarding the teacher who was assaulted. I would like to know the outcome of that. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay. All righty. So with that, our next hybrid school committee meeting will take place in person on Wednesday, December 4th at 6 p.m. at the Bowling Building before the upcoming meeting, this committee will host an in-person retreat on Wednesday, November 20th, here at the Bowling Building. The retreat will build from the discussions from the October 28th session, providing members an opportunity to reconnect and strengthen our focus for a successful school year. Retreat will not be broadcast, but it will be open to the public. With that, is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Thank you.
Is there any discussion or objection to the motion? Is there any objection to approving the motion by unanimous consent? Hearing none, this meeting is adjourned. Thank you all and
Thank
Good night.